The studio lights were bright, the cameras already rolling, and the host smiled into the lens as the live show began. It was just another evening in Hollywood, another talk show with famous faces. People tuned in from all over the country, expecting light-hearted stories, fun jokes, and maybe a little gossip from the stars. Keanu Reeves was one of the guests that night. He walked onto the stage with his usual calm presence. Dressed in a simple black suit, his long hair fell just below his shoulders, and he wore that familiar peaceful smile that never seemed forced. The audience clapped as he waved politely, taking his seat next to the host. Sitting beside him was another legend, Morgan Freeman. The crowd loved seeing them together, two actors, known not just for their roles, but for the mystery and depth they brought to the screen. The host was excited, ready to ask questions about movies, about new projects, about behind-the-scenes fun. For the first few minutes, that's exactly how the interview went. The host laughed, the audience laughed, and Keanu answered with his usual soft humor. Morgan added his clever remarks, and everyone was having a good time. But then, something unexpected happened. The host leaned forward and said, "Keanu, we all know you're a thoughtful guy. You've faced a lot of pain in your life. You've lost people you loved, but you're still humble, calm, peaceful. What keeps you going? What do you believe in?" It was a question that could have gone anywhere. Some stars might have laughed it off or talked about yoga or staying positive. But Keanu paused. He didn't laugh. He didn't rush his answer. He looked down for a second, then back up, right into the eyes of the host. The room grew quiet. A few people in the audience leaned forward. Even the cameraman stopped shifting for a second. Keanu's voice was soft but steady, and when he spoke, his words held something honest, something rare. "I believe in love," he said gently. "I believe in kindness, and I believe in Jesus." For a few seconds nobody said anything, not out of shock, but out of surprise. This wasn't something people often heard on air, especially not in Hollywood. But Keanu didn't stop there. He wasn't trying to preach or sound dramatic. He was just sharing what was in his heart. He continued, "I've lost a lot, my best friend, my daughter, the love of my life, and for a long time, I didn't know how to live with that kind of pain." The host looked at him quietly, and even Morgan Freeman turned slightly toward Keanu, his face suddenly serious. Keanu went on, "There were nights I didn't sleep, days I didn't speak to anyone. I walked the streets alone, sat in silence. I didn't find peace in fame or money, or anything this world offered." The room stayed still. No one laughed, no one moved. Even people backstage watched the monitor, frozen by the moment. But one day, Keanu said, "I picked up a Bible someone had left in a cafe. I didn't plan to read it. I just wanted to pass time, but I opened it, and the first thing I read was, 'Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted.'" He paused again, his eyes thoughtful, and something about those words, it stayed with me. The host didn't speak. Morgan Freeman looked down, lost in thought. Keanu smiled softly. "I'm not perfect. I've made mistakes. I've failed people. But the words of Jesus, they helped me forgive. They helped me keep walking, not because I'm strong, but because I don't walk alone anymore." No one clapped, but not because they didn't care. It was because the moment felt too real, too human. The room felt different, like a weight had been lifted, or a door had been opened. Keanu wasn't acting. He wasn't selling a book or promoting a faith-based film. He was just being Keanu, quiet, honest, and completely open. The audience didn't know how to react. Some wiped their eyes quietly. Some simply sat frozen. Morgan Freeman, a man known for playing God in films, remained unusually quiet. Keanu looked at him for a second and smiled, then looked back at the host and said, "You asked what keeps me going. It's hope. And for me, hope looks like Jesus." It was a simple sentence, but it echoed through the room. The host cleared his throat, clearly not expecting this kind of answer. Even the control room was silent. A producer whispered, "Should we cut to commercial?" But no one answered. Everyone knew they were watching something rare, something real. Keanu leaned back in his chair, calm, not looking for applause, just sharing what had helped him survive. And as the camera panned to Morgan Freeman, no one could have guessed what would happen next. That moment, quiet and unexpected, had already touched something deep in the studio. And it was only the beginning. After Keanu Reeves spoke those words, the entire room felt different. The laughter from before was gone, but no one missed it. Something deeper had taken its place. A strange calm that made even the air feel heavier, but softer. The cameras were still rolling, but they didn't matter now. This wasn't just another celebrity interview anymore. It was something else, something honest, something people didn't expect on live television. Keanu sat with his hands calmly folded, his eyes lowered a bit as if thinking deeply. He wasn't embarrassed. He wasn't looking for attention or praise. He was just sharing a part of himself. No one knew how to break the silence. The host looked around nervously, unsure if he should move the conversation forward or let it breathe. Keanu looked up again and smiled slightly, as if he felt the tension and wanted to ease it. But before the host could speak again, Keanu began to talk once more. His voice was low and peaceful. I think many of us carry pain, but we don't talk about it. We cover it with work, with jokes, with noise, but it doesn't go away. He looked at the audience gently. When I read the words of Jesus, words about love, grace, peace, it didn't fix my life, but it gave me a reason to keep going. His words weren't loud, but they felt powerful. Like soft rain falling on dry ground, he continued. It wasn't about religion, not rules or labels. It was about feeling seen, loved, even in my worst moments. Some audience members nodded slowly. One woman in the front row wiped her eyes, trying not to be seen. Backstage, crew members looked at each other, surprised. One whispered, "I've never heard him talk like this." Another added, "I didn't expect this tonight." Still, Keanu didn't stop. "I've made a lot of mistakes, and I've lost people I love," he said. "And sometimes I still feel alone." He took a small breath. "But when I remember that Jesus walked with people who were broken too, people like me, I feel like maybe I'm not so lost." The host blinked, clearly not sure what to say. He had done hundreds of interviews, but this one was turning into something unforgettable. Then someone else in the room shifted. Not the host, not Keanu, it was Morgan Freeman. He hadn't said a word the entire time, not since Keanu started talking. Usually, he'd make a comment, a wise joke, or a smooth remark. But this time, he was completely quiet. He sat with his hand on his chin, his eyes serious. His famous voice hadn't been heard yet, but everyone was watching him now. Keanu glanced at him briefly, then looked back at the audience. "I know some people might not agree with me," he said calmly. "And that's okay. I just think sometimes sharing what helps us survive might help someone else too." That's when the host finally turned to Morgan and said, "You've been quiet, Morgan. What are your thoughts?" Every head in the room turned. The air froze. Morgan looked up slowly. His face was thoughtful, not confused, not upset, just deep in thought. He gave a soft smile and said, "You know, I've played God more times than I can count." The audience chuckled lightly, some nervously, not sure where he was going with it, but Morgan didn't smile back. He nodded toward Keanu and said, "But tonight, I think I actually heard God, and he didn't sound like me." The room went completely silent again. Morgan leaned forward in his chair, resting his arms on his knees. "I've always respected different beliefs," he said. "I don't claim to have all the answers." He looked at Keanu directly. "But what you just said, that came from a place of truth." Keanu gave a respectful nod, not proud, just grateful. Morgan continued, "You didn't try to impress anyone. You didn't raise your voice or wave your hands. You just spoke." He looked at the audience. "And when someone speaks from a place of pain and peace at the same time, that's something you don't ignore." People in the crowd looked at each other, some still stunned, some smiling gently. Morgan leaned back and added, "You reminded me of something important." The host tried to speak but stopped himself. Morgan wasn't done. He said, "I think sometimes we wait for lightning, some big sign to believe in something bigger. But sometimes, it's just a man speaking softly about hope that hits us the hardest. Keanu smiled, quietly, humbly. And then Morgan said the line that would later be quoted by thousands online. "You didn't come here to preach, Keanu, but somehow, you gave us all a sermon, and I'm thankful for it." There was no applause, still no cheering. Just the kind of silence that comes when everyone is thinking deeply. It was clear now that this wasn't just a moment. It was a memory in the making. Hollywood stage had become something else. A space for truth, for heart, and for healing. And while the cameras kept rolling, something more powerful than a script was unfolding in real time. Keanu and Morgan sat side by side, not as stars, not as legends, but as two men, one sharing, the other listening, and everyone watching felt something they didn't expect to feel that night: hope. After Morgan Freeman spoke, the room felt like it had been wrapped in stillness. A different kind of silence filled the air, not empty, but full, as if everyone in the studio had just heard something they didn't expect, but somehow needed. The host sat back in his chair, eyes wide, clearly surprised by what had just happened. This was not a normal interview anymore. This was something deeper, something that would stay in people's hearts long after the cameras stopped. Keanu didn't say anything right away. He just nodded gently, as if he appreciated Morgan's words, not just as a co-star, but as a man who had understood his heart. Then Keanu looked around the studio, making eye contact with a few people in the audience. He could see it, the quiet emotion in their faces, the watery eyes, the thoughtful frowns, the gentle smiles. He had spoken from the heart, and now others were feeling something too. One woman in the second row sat with her hands pressed together. She didn't blink, didn't move. Her lips were trembling slightly. A man sitting behind her had his head down, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Even one of the camera operators, someone who had filmed hundreds of shows, paused for just a moment to take a breath. It was as if a weight had been lifted and replaced with something warmer. Morgan leaned forward a little, still speaking in his deep voice. "You know," he said, "sometimes it takes real courage to talk about faith on air." Keanu looked at him, quiet but focused. Morgan added, "People don't always react well. Some might judge, some might laugh, but tonight, I think, you gave a lot of people something to think about." Keanu didn't smile big. He just nodded and said softly, "Thank you." The host finally found his voice again and tried to lighten the moment. "Well, I didn't expect to be holding back tears during a Hollywood interview tonight," he said, half joking, half serious. A few people chuckled gently, but even the laughter felt soft, respectful. Keanu turned to the host and said, "You asked me what I believe in, and I just didn't want to hide anymore." He paused, then added, "I spent too much of my life silent, thinking no one wanted to hear the truth about pain, or healing, or hope, but I was wrong." The host nodded, slowly. "Yeah, maybe more people need to hear it." Then he turned to Morgan again, curious. "Have you ever had a moment like that? A moment where someone's honesty just changed something in you?" Morgan didn't answer right away. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes briefly, then said, "Yes, once." He looked out into the studio lights, remembering something far away. "Years ago, I met a little girl in a hospital," he said. "She was very sick, couldn't even sit up in bed." Keanu listened, his expression calm but caring. Morgan continued, "She asked me to read her a story, not because I was famous, not because of my voice, but because she said my voice made her feel less afraid." He smiled faintly. "I remember thinking, this world is full of noise, but sometimes the quietest moments are the ones that matter most." Everyone in the studio was silent again, but it wasn't awkward. It was peaceful. The host looked around at his team, people who were usually busy, checking notes, fixing lights, signaling when to cut, now sitting still, watching, listening. Backstage, a young intern leaned against the wall, whispering to her coworker, "I've never seen anything like this before." Keanu sat with his fingers loosely laced, Still calm, still peaceful. His eyes didn't dart around nervously. He wasn't performing, he was present. Then Morgan turned to Keanu and said, "I don't talk about faith often, but hearing you tonight, I think I understand why it matters." "To you?" Keanu looked him in the eye and replied, "It's not about having all the answers. It's about knowing I'm not walking alone." Morgan nodded slowly. "That's powerful," he said. "That's something worth holding on to." The host let out a quiet breath, then spoke to the camera. "I think everyone watching tonight just experienced something very rare." He smiled softly, not his usual show smile, but something more real. "Sometimes we bring guests here to talk about movies, but tonight we talked about life." The audience clapped this time, not loudly but sincerely. The applause wasn't for fame. It wasn't for a role or a trailer or a funny story. It was for truth. As the segment prepared to go to break, the lights dimmed slightly. The music played softly and the screen faded. But even as the cameras stopped, people in the room kept sitting. Some hugged, some shook hands, others simply sat in silence. No one wanted to break the feeling too quickly. That night, something had changed, not just in the interview, but in the hearts of those who watched it live, and those who would soon see it on screens around the world. Keanu Reeves had spoken, Morgan Freeman had listened, and together, without planning, they had created a moment people would never forget, and that moment was only beginning to spread. As the studio lights dimmed for the break, people didn't rush around like they usually did. There was no loud talking, no buzzing chatter, no jokes backstage. It was like the whole room was holding on to something fragile, something they didn't want to let go of too quickly. Keanu Reeves stayed in his seat, calm as ever. He didn't pull out a phone or start talking about his next film. He simply sat still, as if he was still inside that moment, thinking deeply. Morgan Freeman, sitting beside him, had his hands resting on his knees. He glanced at Keanu a few times, a small smile on his lips, but not the kind of smile that fades quickly. It was a peaceful, thoughtful kind of smile. Backstage, people were whispering, not in gossip, but in reflection. A lighting tech quietly said, "That was something else," while a makeup artist leaned against the wall and wiped her eyes, trying not to be seen. Nobody expected tonight's show to become something so personal, so emotional, so human. When the cameras turned back on, the mood had changed. The music was softer. The host's voice was gentler. He didn't try to joke around to lighten the atmosphere. Instead, he said, "If you're just joining us, you've missed something very rare, something real." The audience was still quiet, listening closely, as if they didn't want to miss a single word. The host turned toward Keanu again. "I've done this job a long time," he said, "and I've talked to a lot of people, but it's not every day someone speaks so honestly about what keeps them going." Keanu nodded, not proud, just grateful. "I think people are tired of pretending everything's okay," he said softly. "We smile for cameras. We post perfect pictures, but inside, a lot of us are still hurting." He paused, looking around at the faces in the audience. When you've lost someone you love, the world doesn't look the same anymore. The audience listened, not blinking, completely pulled into his words. Keanu continued, "For a long time I felt like I was walking through shadows, trying to find the light. I didn't know where to turn." Then he looked directly into the camera. "But when I read the words of Jesus, I felt like someone understood my pain." He smiled gently. "I wasn't alone anymore." At that moment, Morgan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You know," he said in his deep, familiar voice, "I've seen a lot in this life." He turned to Keanu and added, "But it takes a special kind of strength to speak softly, to speak with love, even after pain." Keanu gave a small nod, not saying much, but you could see in his eyes that Morgan's words meant something. Morgan then said something that made everyone in the room lean forward just a little more. "I've always believed in stories, in the power of a voice to touch hearts. But tonight, I didn't just hear a story, I felt one." The audience clapped. Quietly, a few people even stood, not to cheer, but out of respect. The host turned to Morgan, asking gently, "You've played God in films, you've narrated stories about the universe and creation. What does a moment like this make you feel?" Morgan smiled slowly, looking at Keanu. "It makes me feel human," he said. "Sometimes we act like we have all the answers, but tonight, I was reminded that the most powerful words don't come from scripts. They come from the heart." There was a long pause after that, the kind that doesn't feel awkward, but feels full. One of the cameramen later said, "I've worked on hundreds of shows, but this was the first time I forgot I was even filming." Another staff member whispered, "It felt like we were in church but without walls." The host looked at both guests and asked, "Do you think people are ready to talk more about these things? Faith, loss, pain, hope?" Keanu replied, "I think people are starving for truth, real truth, not noise. Not shouting, just something honest." Morgan nodded. "And I think we need more moments like this, where we stop pretending and start listening." That's when the energy in the studio truly shifted. It wasn't just a good interview anymore, it had become something people would carry home. As the segment ended, the lights slowly faded, the music returned softly, and the audience began to stand, not rushing to leave, but walking slowly, some talking in whispers, some just holding on to the feeling. But the most surprising moment came just after the cameras turned off. A young woman from the production crew walked up to Keanu with trembling hands. She had been quiet all night, watching from the side. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said softly. "I lost my brother last year, and nothing made sense after that, but hearing you tonight, it gave me something." Keanu didn't say much. He just reached out, gently held her hand for a moment, and nodded. "I'm really sorry you lost him," he said. "But I promise, you're not walking alone." She nodded back, eyes full of tears but also peace. Morgan watched them and smiled, then quietly said to the host, "You never know who needs to hear the right words at the right time." And that was the truth. A simple question on a live show had opened the door to something powerful. Keanu had walked into that studio as an actor, but walked out as something more. And the world was about to take notice. The show ended, but no one rushed to pack up or turn off the lights. It was strange. Normally, as soon as the cameras stopped, the crew would move fast, actors would say goodbye, and people would joke around. But tonight, the room stayed still, like everyone wanted to hold on to the moment just a little longer. Keanu Reeves stood slowly, not to leave, but to quietly thank the host and shake his hand. Morgan Freeman followed, giving the same calm nod he always gave, but this time it carried more weight. Backstage, people were not looking at their phones or making noise. Instead, they looked at each other, as if they had all just gone through something personal together. One man from the sound team whispered, "That wasn't the show. That was a message." A young assistant director, probably no older than 23, leaned against the wall, wiping her eyes and saying, "I don't know why I'm crying, but I just feel something in my chest, like I needed to hear that." And it wasn't just the people in the room who felt that way. By the time Keanu left the building, a clip from the interview had already been posted online by someone from the audience. It wasn't polished, it wasn't fancy. It was recorded with a phone from the third row. But that didn't matter. People started watching. Thousands of views turned into hundreds of thousands in just hours. Comments poured in from all over the world. Some wrote, "I didn't know Keanu was this deep." Others said, "His words made me stop scrolling and just listen." One person even wrote, "I've been angry with God for years, but tonight, I think I might pray again." It was like a wave had started, soft but steady, and it didn't stop. In a cafe in Brazil, a mother showed the clip to her teenage son, saying, "You see? Even someone like him needs faith." In a hospital in Canada, a nurse played the clip on her break and later said, "That gave me peace in a day full of stress." Even in places far from Hollywood, far from fame, Keanu's quiet voice was reaching people. Meanwhile, Keanu stayed silent. He didn't post about it. He didn't ask for attention. He didn't even comment. He just went back to his simple life, riding the subway, buying coffee alone, walking in quiet streets. But those who saw the clip didn't forget. The studio received emails, messages, and letters, thousands of them. Some people wrote to thank Keanu. Some shared their stories of loss. Some said they were thinking about God again for the first time in years. The producers of the show sat in a meeting room days later. Reading some of the messages, one said, "We've interviewed Oscar winners, presidents, billionaires. No one ever got this kind of response." Another added, "It wasn't because he talked about religion. It was because he was real." At the same time, the young woman who had spoken to Keanu after the show, the one who had lost her brother, posted on her social media. She wrote, "I work behind the scenes on that show, and I've seen many celebrities come and go. But last night, I saw something different. Keanu didn't act like a star. He looked me in the eyes, listened to me, and said, 'You're not walking alone.' And for the first time in a year, I believed him." Her post was shared thousands of times. It wasn't just the message Keanu had given, it was how he had given it. No shouting, no preaching, no trying to be perfect. Just honesty, pain, peace and hope. And then something else happened. A few churches, youth groups, and even community centers started playing the interview clip during gatherings. They didn't care if it was from a talk show. They saw the heart in it. A pastor in a small town showed it to his group and said, "If he can talk about Jesus on a stage like that, maybe we can talk about him too." Keanu never said he was a preacher, never claimed to be a spiritual leader. He just spoke as a man who had suffered, healed slowly, and found something to hold on to. Morgan Freeman's reaction had added weight to the moment, but it was Keanu's calm that gave people comfort. In one high school, a teacher played the clip for her students during a class discussion on belief and identity. Some students cried. One raised her hand and said, "That was better than any lecture I've heard this year." Back in Hollywood, the studio kept getting letters. One from an elderly woman said, "I'm 82. I've watched your show for years. But what I saw that night brought tears to my eyes. I lost my husband 10 years ago, and that man on your stage, he made me feel less alone." It was clear now, this moment wasn't going away. It had started in a quiet studio, with one man speaking softly, and another man listening with respect. And now, it was traveling across cities, countries, and hearts. Keanu had no idea that his words shared without fear, without fame, would begin something that no one could stop. All he wanted was to answer a question honestly, but sometimes, one honest answer is all it takes to remind the world what hope sounds like. And the world was listening. The days passed, but the moment didn't fade. The short clip of Keanu Reeves talking about faith and pain had already been shared millions of times. Yet, it wasn't just about the numbers, something deeper was happening. People weren't just watching the clip, they were feeling it. They were replaying it during lunch breaks, sharing it in prayer groups, sending it to friends who were hurting. And still, Keanu Reeves said nothing publicly, no follow-up interviews, no long speeches, no press releases. He stayed silent, calm, almost as if he didn't want to step into the spotlight that had suddenly grown around him. But others were stepping forward, quietly and sincerely. One actor who had worked with Keanu in the past posted on social media, "I've known Keanu for years. He never talks to impress, he speaks to connect." That clip? That's exactly who he is off camera too. A famous singer reposted the video and wrote, "We need more voices like this, not shouting, just speaking truth with kindness." Then came something unexpected. Morgan Freeman, the man who had sat silently during most of the interview before delivering his powerful words, released a short video on his personal page. It wasn't flashy, just him sitting in a chair, looking thoughtful. He said, "I've done many interviews in my life, but that one stayed with me." He continued, "Keanu didn't try to teach anyone. He didn't claim to know everything. But the way he shared his heart, it reminded me that we're all searching. Some of us search in silence, and sometimes It takes someone else's voice to help us hear our own. That video also went viral. And for a while, the internet felt less noisy, more human. Comment sections, usually full of arguments and anger, were now filled with people saying thank you or sharing their own stories. A mother wrote, "I lost my daughter 3 years ago. I haven't talked about it much, but after seeing that interview, I sat down with my husband and cried for the first time in a long time." A teenager commented, "I've been depressed for a while and didn't know how to tell anyone. But after watching Keanu speak, I told my mom everything." The wave kept growing, not because of promotion, not because of marketing, but because it was real. And then, the talk show that had hosted the interview did something no one expected. They released the full, unedited version of the entire segment. The version that didn't cut for commercials or squeeze things to fit TV time. It showed every pause, every glance, every quiet second where nothing was said, but everything was felt. In the full version, something new was noticed right after. Morgan Freeman said his final words, and right before the cameras cut, Keanu looked down and whispered something softly, almost like a prayer. The microphone barely picked it up, but it was there. He said, "Thank you, God, for letting me say what needed to be said. It wasn't meant to be heard. It wasn't for show." But somehow, hearing those words made the moment feel even more real. People began to watch the full version instead of just the short clip. And more stories came in, stories of healing, of reconnecting with faith, of opening up to others after staying silent for too long. One man said, "I was planning to take my life the day I saw that video, but I paused, watched it again, and then called my brother instead." Another woman wrote, "I've been an atheist for years, but Keanu didn't push religion. He just showed what love and peace can look like. And now I'm curious again." Churches and schools began to reach out to the show, asking permission to share the video in classrooms, youth centers, hospitals. But the producers didn't say no. In fact, they made the full clip free to download and use. No ads, no credits, just the message. The host of the show, in a follow-up episode, spoke directly to the camera and said, "We didn't plan that moment, and honestly, we couldn't have even written it if we tried. But maybe that's the point, some things are bigger than TV." He added, "Keanu reminded us that real conversations matter, that people are still listening when someone dares to speak from the heart." And even now, days after, Keanu remained quiet. He didn't brag, didn't post pictures, didn't try to ride the wave of attention. Instead, someone spotted him quietly visiting a children's hospital, bringing books and toys. No cameras, no press. He just walked in, sat with kids, and talked to them, not as a star, but as a friend, one nurse said. He sat with a little boy for almost 40 minutes, reading a book with silly voices and laughing with him like he had all the time in the world. Another staff member whispered, "He asked the kids what made them feel brave, not what made them famous." It was clear now this wasn't just a viral moment. It had become something much bigger. Keanu had reminded the world that even in the loudest places, a quiet voice full of love can still be heard. And the world had listened, really listened. Keanu Reeves didn't say a single word about the interview after it aired. But the world kept talking about him. Everywhere people went, cafes, train rides, school halls, dinner tables, his name came up. Not because of a movie, not because of an award, but because of the way he had spoken about Jesus' pain and hope. On live television, it was rare to see someone from Hollywood open up like that. Even rarer to see the audience respond with such silence and respect. Keanu didn't raise his voice, didn't quote fancy lines. He spoke gently, like a friend who had been through something and wanted others to know they weren't alone. Then, something unexpected happened again. Morgan Freeman, who had supported Keanu with powerful words during the interview, surprised everyone by making a post on his social media. The post wasn't long or flashy, just a simple message with a photo from the studio. It read, "Faith is personal, but when shared with love, it touches the world. Thank you, Keanu, for reminding me of that." That one message was shared more than 2 million times in the first 24 hours. People from all kinds of backgrounds, religious and not religious, began talking about how the moment made them feel. Some said they cried. Some said they prayed for the first time in years. Others said they just felt calm, like a heavy weight inside their heart had lifted. Even people who had never been fans of Keanu started watching old videos of him, how he gave up his seat on the subway, how he sat beside homeless people on the street, how he lived alone and donated in secret to children's hospitals. One comment: "Read, now I get it. He doesn't just act in movies, he lives like a real human being." And slowly, something started happening across the internet, something rare. Something beautiful. The noise began to quiet down for once. People weren't arguing in the comments. They were listening. They were sharing personal stories of loss and love. They were talking about faith, not to win an argument, but to open their hearts in a world full of loud voices and harsh opinions. One soft voice had changed the mood. Even major news channels picked up the story. One anchor said during a live segment, "This isn't about religion. This is about being honest." Keanu opened his heart, and people felt seen. Late-night shows, usually full of jokes and celebrity gossip, gave a moment of silence before rolling the clip. Audiences clapped not because they were told to, but because they felt something real. A radio station in a small town in Ireland played the audio of the full interview during their night program. And after it aired, people called in crying and thanking the hosts. One caller said, "I was sitting in my car, ready to give up on everything. But that voice, that moment, it stopped me." The producers of the talk show that hosted Keanu and Morgan were overwhelmed. Their inbox was flooded with emails from around the world: India, South Africa, Germany, Brazil. People weren't asking for autographs or interviews. They were asking, "How can I watch the full video again?" Or, "Can I share this at my church, at my school, in my recovery group?" The producers said yes to all of it. No fees, no ads, just the message, freely shared. Even other celebrities began to speak up, not about themselves, but about what Keanu's words had reminded them of. One actor posted, "We often hide behind scripts and red carpets, but maybe it's time we speak from our souls." Another singer wrote, "I'm not a Christian, but I respect how Keanu spoke. No judgment, no pressure, just peace." This wave of kindness, this wave of deep feeling, wasn't like anything the internet had seen before. It was like the world had paused for a moment, just long enough to feel again, to breathe, to think about what really matters. And in the middle of it all, Keanu stayed quiet, still not posting anything, still not giving interviews, but people spotted him, quietly helping out at food banks, visiting schools, spending time at animal shelters. He didn't speak into cameras. He spoke to people one-on-one. A school principal in a small town shared, "Keanu visited our school without warning, sat with a group of teens, and asked them what makes them feel safe." Another person posted a blurry photo of Keanu at a nursing home, helping an old man fix a broken picture frame. The world was watching, but Keanu was just living. It became clear that this moment, this quiet, faith-filled moment on a talk show, was going to be remembered, not just because of who said it, but because of how it made people feel. It was a reminder that faith doesn't need a stage. Love doesn't need a microphone, and hope doesn't shout. It whispers, it speaks gently, like Keanu did, and when spoken with truth, even the softest whisper can echo across the world. Weeks passed, but people were still talking about that one interview. The video hadn't faded like most online trends do. It was still being shared, still being watched, and still being felt deep in people's hearts. Keanu Reeves had returned to his quiet life, just like always. He didn't use the moment to promote a film or gain attention. He didn't go on a tour of interviews or write a book about it. Instead, he disappeared from the spotlight. Not because he was hiding, but because he had already said what needed to be said. And what he said was still echoing around the world, in homes. People re-watched the clip late at night when they couldn't sleep. In hospitals, nurses played it for patients to bring calm during hard moments. In schools, teachers used it to start conversations about life, grief, and faith. It was more than just a clip. It had become a kind of medicine, soft and healing. One small church in a mountain village played it before their Sunday service. The pastor said, "You may not believe everything he says, but you can't deny the love in his voice." A counselor shared it with her therapy group and later said, "My clients finally opened up, not because I pushed them, but because someone they respected showed that it's okay to talk about pain." The world had changed, not in a big dramatic way, but in a quiet, powerful one. People were speaking more kindly, listening more patiently. They were remembering something they had forgotten in the rush of everyday life, that every person is carrying something unseen, and sometimes the gentlest words can bring the most healing. Keanu's words had reminded them of that. Then something beautiful happened. A young girl who had watched the interview with her father wrote a letter to the show. She said, "My dad never talked about his feelings, but after we watched Keanu's video, he cried, hugged me, and told me he loved me. That was the best day of my life." The show's producers read her letter and many others like it. They realized that the episode had become something bigger than ratings or views. It had become a memory, a moment in time that people would carry with them. So they made a decision. They created a special tribute episode, not with celebrities or glamour, but with ordinary people, teachers, nurses, parents, young people who had been touched by that interview. One by one, they shared how Keanu's words had helped them. A firefighter who had lost a friend in a fire said, "I watched that video during the loneliest night of my life, and it felt like someone was sitting beside me, reminding me to breathe." Teenager who had struggled with self-worth said, "He didn't say I had to believe in anything right away. He just said hope is still real." And that was enough to keep going. Even the host, who had been quiet since that day, spoke in the tribute. He said, "We brought Keanu on to talk about movies, but he gave us something more. He reminded us that in a world full of noise, honesty is still powerful." As the episode aired, people all over the world tuned in again, not for drama, not for entertainment, but for connection. They sat with their families, with their friends, with themselves, watching stories that came from the heart. And in the final moments of that special episode, they played the clip one more time. Keanu's soft voice, his steady eyes, his quiet strength, once again filled the screen. He said, "It's not about being perfect. It's about not giving up. It's about remembering that love still exists, even when life feels dark." And then the clip faded out, not with loud music, not with credits, just with silence. A respectful, peaceful silence. The kind of silence that lets people think, breathe, and feel outside the screen. People began to live differently, even in small ways. A man forgave his brother after years of anger. A woman visited her grandmother and told her she missed her. A child held their mom's hand and asked if she believed in angels. Little things, quiet things, but meaningful things. And maybe that's what made the whole moment so unforgettable. Keanu didn't change the world with noise. He did it with stillness. He showed that you don't need to speak loudly to be heard. You just need to speak with truth. Morgan Freeman later said in another interview, "There are moments in life that stay with you forever." That night with Keanu, that was one of them. And he was right. That single interview had turned into a ripple that moved across hearts, families, cities, even countries. Not because Keanu claimed to have all the answers, but because he had the courage to be honest, to say, "I believe in Jesus," to say, "I've lost people," to say, "Hope is real," and then to let those words live without trying to control what people did with them. Sometimes the best way to lead is not to teach, but to share. And Keanu did just that, not as a movie star, not as a spiritual guide, but simply as a human being. And because of that, millions of others felt a little more human too.